Thanks everyone for joining in. Um, so today, to overview the MDIC's external evidence methods framework, that project, we have been thinking of various ways to gather a lot of input. So we thought that it'll be really important to have insights from subject matter experts like you. So we have convened three subject matter experts who is helping MDIC to lead this effort. So I'm Jitesh Vidal. I'm the program director at MDIC, leading data science and technology initiative. So our panelists today are Dr. Ram Tiwari, who is the director of division of biostatistics at Office of Clinical Evidence and Analysis at CDRH. And we have Ted Listick, who is the senior director corporate biostatistics with Medtronic. And then we have Vandana Bhatia, who is the assistant director for division of biostatistics at CDRH. Most of you might be familiar, but I would utilize one or two slides just to give an overview of MDIC before we jump into the actual EEM framework and the details from the subject matter experts. So MDIC is a non-profit organization. It's a public-private partnership. Actually, it was created as a brainstorming idea or a brainchild of Jeff Shuren almost 8 years ago. MDIC came into existence in 2012. It has got medical device and diagnostic industry as members. We have almost 50 or 60 members, which include device and diagnostic industry. We have government entities like FDA, CMS, NIH as our federal entity members. And we also interface with a lot of patient organization, patient advocacy groups, providers, and academic establishments. Most of the things we undertake at MDIC are purely to advance regulatory science. We don't do any lobbying or policy related issues. So the MDIC is considered as a safe space for industry and FDA and other stakeholders to come and do the problems, and take care of addressing some of the issues and problem solving in terms of advancing regulatory science. In terms of organizational structure, MDIC has got 6 core areas. First one is clinical science, which include programs like early feasibility studies, science of patient input, and so on. Then we have diagnostics, as well as case for quality. And then I lead data science and technology, which involves computational modeling and simulation, external evidence methods or real world evidence methods, as well as cybersecurity. And MDIC also have projects in health economics and patient access where we interface with payers like CMS and others. And in 2018, MDIC also got a grant from FDA to set up or establish the NEST Coordinating Center to promote real-world evidences, and we are undertaking a lot of pilot studies and pilot projects on real-world evidence through NEST. That's the core organization structure of MDIC. So as I mentioned, in the data science and technology, I lead programs on external evidence methods, computational modeling and simulation, cybersecurity, and recently we added programs on digital health and AI. As I mentioned earlier, most of the programs and projects which MDIC is undertaking, they are all in pre-competitive space. So we are considered as a safe space for industry and FDA as well as other stakeholders to come and work collaboratively. And the way we organized is for each programs or project, we have an MDIC lead, like a program director, and then we have a program lead or project champion from industry side, and we have a counterpart to lead the project from FDA side, and so on for each of the projects. So, just before I turn over to the subject matter experts on EEM today, I also wanted to announce a few things here. MDIC usually have its annual public forum, usually in the summer, as an in-person event where we highlight all the accomplishments whatever we are undertaking and the progress we are making. So, but this year, this is going to be an online event, and we are virtually holding a series of sessions, 1-hour sessions from June 18th, which is next Thursday, through September 24th, every Thursday, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. All the sessions are free to register. You can individually register. For example, the very first session, kickoff session, is on June 18th, where FDA Commissioner will be presenting or talking along with Pamela Goldberg, who is MDIC CEO. And then on June 25th, there will be a CDRH town hall where all the senior level leadership from CDRH will be giving an update on what's new and great at CDRH. And for this particular group, we will have an external evidence methods related session on September 3rd, 2 to 3 p.m. on Thursday. The registration is already open and it's free. So I'll recommend you all to take a look at the website, apf.mdic.org, and register for the sessions and add it to your calendar. With that, I would like to, one more thing just before I turn over. So MDIC also has got a lot of resources relevant to this group. For example, if you visit MDIC's resource library on the, there's a tab on resource library on the top of the MDIC website, and you can see a lot of resources on NEST data quality and data methods, MDIC's virtual patient modeling resources, and then you can also see the recently released in vitro diagnostics, real world evidence framework, and more. All these resources are free to download and utilize. So I would recommend you to take a look at the resource section of MDIC. So with that, I'm going to turn to our panelists today. So the plan is Dr. Ram Tiwari from FDA will start off, and then Vandana Bhatia from FDA will overview the survey and the context. And then Ted Listick from Medtronic will be going to give more updates on how we are going to envision or how we are going to accomplish the actual framework and so on. So please mute your microphone if you are not muted. And for interacting with the panelists, please use the Q&A option in the Zoom. And you can also use the chat, but for the question answer, please use Q&A option. And our aim is to have the presentation from the three panelists in the first 20-30 minutes, and then you will have enough time. We'll have enough time to interact with them, even using the voice option at the end of the session. With that, I will turn over to Ram Tiwari from FDA to overview the external evidence methods.
Thank you, Jitesh. This is Ram Tiwari. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hope you are all doing fine. As Jitesh mentioned, I'm going to give you a very brief intro of EEM program. So external evidence method, can we go to next slide, Jitesh? Yeah. So as I mentioned, that EEM program was launched in April 2019. There was a workshop that was held, and most of the attendees are probably joining this webinar. And so the goal was that we establish a more predictable pathway for use of the external evidence methods and develop a EEM framework document that could be used in pre-market submission where we are leveraging the external evidence methods. So far, we have identified a number of case examples within FDA that will go into this EEM framework, but our goal is to reach out to you to see if you can identify some case examples where external evidence methods have been used and what kind of method has been used, or if you have some submission that is ongoing, and if you can identify what kind of data source has been used or what kind of data source you are contemplating to use in that, that would be helpful. So we are reaching out to you through this survey to get more information about about the EEM framework in terms of the type of data, in terms of types of methods that you may have seen that has been used, and if there are some gaps, identifying the gap where we can develop new novel methods. So I will hand over to Vandana to talk more about the survey. Vandana?
Thank you, Ram. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Vandana Bhatia from FDA, CDRH. Jitesh, can you move on to the next slide, please? So as we work towards developing the MDIC EEM Framework document, as Ram mentioned, we envision here that the framework document will categorize different sources of data that are external to the current clinical study. It will help catalog and provide a brief synopsis of the existing statistical methods for leveraging external data. It would include in it examples to illustrate the use of statistical methodology, as well as it will include summary information that will be collected through the EEM survey, and that will help us in identifying gaps where new innovative methods need to be developed. Next slide, please. Now, just to give you a glimpse of what may be included in the framework document, here are a couple of illustrative examples displaying information that we seek to collect through the MDIC survey. As you notice here in example 1, clinical study leveraged external data from a registry. And in example 2, a clinical study leveraged external data from historical clinical study, and that was patient-level data from historical clinical study. Now, in both of these examples, data that was external to the clinical study, either from a registry, prospective patient from a registry, or patient-level data from a previous clinical study, and that data got utilized to construct the control arm. So as you see here in columns 4 and 5, we have external data being utilized either for investigational device arm or for control arm. In these two examples, external data got utilized to construct the control arm, and the methodology was propensity score methodology that got utilized to make statistical inference. Now, through the MDIC EEM survey, we seek to collect similar information on other such clinical studies. Next slide. Jitesh, can you move on to the next? Oh, thank you. The EEM framework document will also catalog and provide a synopsis of the statistical methods that can be utilized to leverage external data. We saw in the previous 2 examples that illustrated use of propensity score methodology. Bayesian hierarchical modeling is another approach that may be considered for leveraging external data. Propensity score integrated power prior approach or the propensity score integrated composite likelihood approach are 2 novel approaches that were recently developed by statisticians in our division and Dr. Wong from Johns Hopkins. And these approaches can be utilized to augment current clinical studies. So here I'm listing just some of the statistical methods that can be utilized. And of course, this list isn't an exhaustive list here. There are more statistical methods that can be added to the list here, and that work is in progress and will be part of the EEM framework document. Next slide. Now, MDIC will be administering the EEM survey by sending out the SurveyMonkey link. And now let's get into the details of what and how, what we are requesting through this survey by going to the next slide. So through the survey, we are requesting input from industry statisticians to collect information on use of external data for making statistical inference for primary endpoints. The clinical study information gathered through the survey will then be summarized in the EEM framework document. The survey is organized into 2 sections. Section 1 focuses on capturing information on clinical studies associated with a medical device approved or cleared by the FDA. So these are some medical device that are already approved, and associated information on the clinical studies that led to the approval, which were submitted as pre-market applications, is what we are seeking information on in Section 1. In Section 2, it focuses on capturing information on pre-market investigational device clinical studies that are currently being conducted for FDA approval or clearance, or have been completed but have not yet been submitted, or didn't go through the approval process yet. So essentially, things that did not get covered in Section 1 and are ongoing would be in Section 2. Now, within each of these two sections, we have several questions. Next slide, please. So once you enter the survey, it will start by going to Section 1, where the first question is requesting a response as a yes or no question to, did you ever receive approval or clearance of an investigational product based on studies designed to leverage external data to make statistical inference? If you answer yes to this question, then going on to the next slide, here we are requesting the number of such clinical study submissions on which you would be willing to share some information. So depending on how many of such submissions you may have, you provide information for each particular submission. Next slide, please. Similarly, in Section 2, which relates to questions on clinical studies that are currently ongoing, the first question requests a yes or no response to the question that, in regulatory pre-market submissions, have you ever proposed leveraging data from external sources to make statistical inference? Next slide. And if you answer yes to the first question in Section 2, the next question then again asks you for the number of such clinical study submissions on which you would be willing to share some information. Next slide. Now, once you respond yes to either of the two sections, I just listed here as bullet points the questions that we are requesting information on. There are 4 key questions which are being requested in both Section 1 and 2, and 2 additional questions in Section 1. And I will now go through showing you a snapshot of those questions and what those include. Next slide. So for each clinical study submission, the first request is what external data source was utilized. So here, as options, we list several different external data sources that one may be considering in their clinical studies. This external data may be from registry. It could be prospective patients from the registry or existing data from the registry. The external data source may be a historical clinical study, a clinical study that was conducted either in US or OUS prior to the current clinical study, and either patient-level data or summary-level data may be utilized in some manner in the current clinical study. Or it could be that there is data from either laboratory data, claims data, could be electronic health records data, or modeling and simulation data that is being utilized in the current clinical study. So you may pick one or more options as appropriate for your particular clinical study. Next slide. Next question requests, how was external data utilized? Now, the external data may be utilized either to construct or to augment either the control arm or the investigational arm, or in some cases, both arms. So again, you may pick one or more options that may be applicable in your particular submission. Next slide. The third key question requests input on which statistical method was used. And here we list several statistical methods as options to pick from, or you may pre-specify, you may put down as the open box here, the method that was utilized. Next slide. Now, to further catalog the existing statistical methods, we also request if you can share with us the relevant literature article by uploading the paper or by providing a web link to that particular paper so it can be included as a reference as we are developing the EEM framework document. Next slide. Now, there are two additional questions that are included in section 1. One of them is requesting information on the type of device that was approved or cleared. So it may be a first-of-a-kind device, either a first generation or a second or later generation device. And again, it could be a combination of these where it may be a first generation device, but the external data was utilized in a clinical submission for indication expansion or label expansion. So you may pick those two options. Or it may be for modification of an approved device for which external data was leveraged. So depending on the clinical study, you may again pick from here the options that are applicable. Next question here asks you for the product name. So if you are willing to share for the approved or clear device, the product for which this clinical submission you're providing information on, and also if you would be willing to provide more details that can then be incorporated into the EEM framework document. With this, I look forward to if you have any questions, and I will request Ted to take over from here. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Vandana. So, Jitesh, am I just speaking to this one, or is there a separate slide after this? There we go. Okay, thank you. All right. So we called you to this meeting. Really, the primary purpose is we're trying to drive people to complete the survey. And you're experts in this area, familiar with what's going on. So really, we want to have responses from the survey. We're hopeful that by going through the information as Vandana has presented it, that now you've got an idea of what we're looking for and the components and how that might go through. So I want to talk a bit more about, well, what are we going to do with this type of information? Well, so broadly, what we'd like to get to is make it easier for sponsors to be able to submit submissions with external data, make it easier for the FDA to review submissions that use external data. And then in addition to that, we want to discuss and describe the methods that are currently in use, identify where the methods need development or improvement, and to give an overall summary in terms of just what is being done. So if you are developing your own methods to go down this path, more power to you. You're probably going to have to publish that at some point, though. So if you've got a submission out there you can share, that'd be great. But if you're looking to leverage approaches that are already out there, please share. Let us know broadly the type of methods you're doing. We can all learn from each other for how we do this. This should be considered a pre-competitive space, right? We just want to understand from a statistical perspective how you're going about this. The idea of leveraging external information is something that certainly seems to have strong potential in terms of improving the amount of time needed to generate evidence, which then should improve the rate at which we can get out quality new therapies to our patients. That's really what we're trying to drive to. When we get the data from the survey, we're also hopeful that some of you on this call will be interested to join those of us that have presented today in further discussions around analyzing some of this data, tabulating it, putting together more effort in terms of describing the various methods that are out there, perhaps advancing some additional methods that need to be built up further going onwards, right? So we want to get the information. Hopefully there's enough that we can do some meaningful summaries. And in a sense, we're inspired a little bit by some of the work that Cindy had done a couple of years ago for the adaptive study surveys within FDA CDRH, right? So that was a really nice job where they went through and said what's being done within FDA, the number of submissions, what types of adaptations are out there. We believe we can do something similar here from the external evidence. It's still a bit new though, so we also wanted to capture things that are in process. And this is to the extent that you are able to share such information. We We've hoped that we have structured these questions in a way that it wouldn't be problematic to share it. And it is, by putting all that information out there together, something that we can all benefit from. We've also tried to make the survey set up in a way that, suppose you have multiple multiple studies within an organization. Well, because it's set up in these blocks that you answer what happens for a given study within a block, then that does mean that you can actually pass the link to other team members to go ahead and fill in. We're not overly concerned about knowing the number of such submissions per organization. We're more interested in knowing sort of the overall total number of different types of submissions, ones that use different methodological approaches or sort of what's out there. We don't, I don't anticipate us saying that there were 5 organizations that had 4 submissions, that there were 8 organizations that had 2 such submissions. That's not as helpful. It's more helpful to say what types of approaches are being used, what's out there. So I think that's broadly speaking what I'm interested in pushing out. We do see value in this. We would like to see persons take the time to push the information outwards. We're looking for some of you to contact us directly afterwards if you would be interested in contributing. So for instance, you see Jithesh's email here, or if you want to contact the rest of us directly, we're certainly open to that as well. We do have a Q&A period now. Everyone is on mute, but we do have this Q&A panel, and you'll see that Jitesh has used the chat function as well, saying, okay, there's that Q&A option on the screen, and we also do have that actual Q&A function with open questions answered and dismissed. So if anyone does have any questions, please go ahead and put that in. We are available for the next half hour to answer questions. While I'm waiting for those, I can certainly tee up any additional some additional questions for discussion. And Jitesh, do I have a next slide here? Yeah, just the overall Q&A. Good. Okay, so I am hopeful that we will have some questions, talking just a little bit, trying to get some folks to bring something forward. One thing I'll go, perhaps Ram, I'll ask you a question. So, this is an area that, within the MDIC, Jitesh laid out the sort of background that the whole concept of MDIC is something that Jeff Shern is very keen on. It's been around for 8 years. We have made some good progress. And it does feel, from the outside going in, like there is support for development submissions that use this type of external evidence. And so what's the broad sense of the FDA? Is this something, do you think, that it is an opportunity that sponsors perhaps aren't leveraging as fully as they could, or what's the general receptivity within the FDA side for seeing more submissions that try to pull in external evidence?
So Ted, thanks a lot. So yes, we have noticed increase in submissions, pre-market submissions, that are using external evidence or external data sources, registry data, out of US data, OUS data, historical clinical data, and also virtual patients, that is modeling and simulation data. We have seen submissions in that area. So we have seen Bayesian methods, we have seen hierarchical Bayesian hierarchical methods, we have seen now even power prior methodology used. So we are seeing more and more submissions coming in, and that's really going to be the trend in pre-market submissions, so where we are going to depend more on real world evidence. And that is where we can bring in the information from and use that in a regulatory setup to expedite the study and save time and save cost both. So we certainly have been seeing increase in such submissions, Ted.
So great to hear that we do have this increased number of submissions. One of the things that we hope to get out of this, as I discussed, is to provide, not only more information for sponsors to go down this path, but if we can understand better the methods being used, maybe also impact the processes by which the FDA is able to evaluate this. Like, people describe their external data in a consistent way. if they point to methods that you've seen before, that seems like it would be a benefit to the FDA as well in terms of how you guys can process the information coming in. How do you feel that the persons, is there a lot of variability in those cases that have come in terms of how people are describing real-world data or external evidence they're pulling in?
So there is variability, and most often the external data that we are seeing in use essentially is from historical clinical data and OUS data. We have seen very few submissions based on the registry, use of the medical device registry. We have seen 1 or 2 cases using the virtual patient models. Yes, there is a variability. What is the objective of the framework is that probably we believe have certainly the consistency in terms of the submission and in terms of the methods. At least it will give some guidance how to leverage the external evidence and kind of data sources that we can leverage evidence from, not just methods, but also the data sources. And another good thing about this framework would be to identify the gaps. What are the existing gaps in terms of the methods, whether it is frequentist or Bayesian method. And then maybe we can work together collaboratively and develop new methods that can be appropriate to leverage such information from whatever data source we identify. So this is going to be a collaborative effort. We will reach out to folks again in terms of getting help, but this is the first step to get the feedback from industry folks in terms of the type of data sources and methods that have been used or are being planned to be used in regulatory submissions.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Ram. We did have a question come up. Brad Carlin has something that appears within the Q&A chat, talking about how he took the survey, slightly confused by the request to provide information, at first thinking that that meant providing actual data or other proprietary things. I'm an independent consultant, so cannot possibly do that. I persevered and provided the big picture answers requested by the survey, but of course stuck to the big picture. I also stuck to examples of devices, not drugs. Drug side remains much tough nut to crack. Vanda, could you talk a little bit more about the type of information that we're hoping to get for the request to provide information?
Yeah, sure, Ted. Through this survey, we are focusing on medical device submissions. So these are clinical studies that have been designed to get FDA approval. So either clinical studies that have already been conducted and were utilized to get medical device approval through FDA, or studies that are currently ongoing and will be submitted later on for FDA approval purposes. So really focusing on medical device submissions in this case, as well as where, and specifically focusing on where external data is being leveraged into making statistical inference. So it's being utilized into the primary endpoint hypothesis testing, that, or how you're planning to make your statistical inference for that particular device and make claims. So how is the external data being leveraged into what method is being used and how the inference is being made using that data. So that's where the main focus is here. And I think the questions that we have laid out kind of clearly asks you for the 4 aspects of those particular clinical studies, of what source of data, how it's being utilized, and the method, as well as in references that you can provide.
So Ted, let me add to that what Vandana just mentioned.
Sure.
We have identified 8 case examples from real world data sources that we have in our in-house. And these case examples we are going to put in this framework that will talk about the type of data, external data, and we'll talk about the methods that have been used. Vandana gave two examples, that propensity score and Bayesian hierarchical method. So we will mention and talk about those 8 case examples. But it is important that we hear from participants here that if they have some more case examples or know about undergoing some studies where they are using external data sources, that will really help us to strengthen the framework. And that's why we are reaching out. Yes, what Brad is asking about CDER, of course, CDRH is very natural to use external data sources and OUS data. But in CDER, in the drug side, still use of the Bayesian methods is non-existent. But we are in a very good position in CDRH to not only use the external data sources, but Bayesian methods, including the innovative methods, power prior or commensurate power prior or commensurate prior. So yes, that's where we are going.
Great. Thank you for both that, Ram and Vandana. And Brad, for just one final thing, for other persons looking to get this, when we're asking for additional information, the focus here really is we're trying to understand the types of information, broad speaking, whether it's coming from a historical trial, whether it's coming from registries, that kind of types, not the actual data values. And we're also trying to understand what sorts of methods are being used. So if you can point to, maybe there's a published article, that you've already talked about this in the literature, point us to that so we can understand how that method was used with the trial. Or perhaps, maybe there's a ct.gov listing that's got some similar information. It'd just be nice that, we have a better sense of how that method might have been used with the data. So hopefully that's clear for that item. We have a couple more questions that have come in, so I want to keep going through. One of them is, it's mostly focused on the drug side, saying, will submissions from Rare Disease Network be welcome for drugs? We are planning to use natural history registry data using Bayesian methods such as commensurate power priors. Ram, you hit a bit of that. Do you just want to give a quick answer to that real quick?
Yeah, so I mean, I used to be in CDER before coming to CDRH, and we did have a submission on natural history. And I thought that one of the submissions that was there was very innovative and did propose innovative method in that context. And but I have left CDER. I really don't know what is the current status and what kind of submissions are coming in CDER that you proposes to use Bayesian novel methods, or including power prior or hierarchical Bayesian or commensurate prior. But we in CDRH are ready, and in fact, not only just we have the guidance, but we have been seeing the submissions using these innovative methods.
Great, thank you for that. Next one I have up is several of the questions allow multiple responses by a respondent. For example, 2 methods could be chosen and 2 data sources. Will there be a way of linking response from one question to the response to another? That is, which method of the 2 methods was used with which type of data? Or does that matter at this point? I'll take an initial stab on that, and Vandana, perhaps you can follow up afterwards. Certainly we would have the information kind of within an answer to look at what's going on. But broadly speaking, it's kind of interesting. We hope that there are enough responses that we can do, good summary data, that, that there was 27 cases of using the hierarchical models, that there, whatever. If it turns out that there's a smaller number, then we can perhaps go a bit more in detail. We might choose to try to follow up for persons that have said it was okay to contact them to ask them additional details. Because we are asking for fairly broad strokes information here. And that was this balance, right? We want people to be able to answer without it being, this big proprietary issue. But we also want to get enough information we can kind of understand what the current status is. So a little bit of a balance in that. Vandana, do you want to comment any further on how we were thinking about using that information?
Sure. Yes, thank you, Ted. So I think certainly having the information about the product name, the submission number, or the indication for the approved devices would be very helpful, as well as your willingness to share the details of that particular submission that can then be included in the framework document will help connect the dots for us as well, because it would be, it's true that you can pick more than one choice in terms of the type of external data source as well as in the method. But for us to know exactly how those things are connected would not be possible if you unless you provide us more details. And we understand that for the ongoing studies, this is confidential information, so we certainly are not looking into including any of that. It would more be summary level information for ongoing studies and studies that have not yet been submitted to FDA for approval. But for approved studies, we certainly would be looking forward to your collaboration in providing us details that can then be part of the framework document. So thank you for that question.
So a related one, Vana, came up. Greg Mason has put something in here saying, great initiative. As a consulting statistician, I've been involved in both completed studies and I'm currently involved in ongoing studies using external data for regulatory review. I assume I can point to SSEDs for completed studies without assent from the sponsor. Do you agree? For ongoing studies, I assume I need assent from the sponsor before providing any information in such cases. Any advice on approaching sponsors about this? Can some particulars be excluded from public view if the sponsors require this? So I think this is a build, Vandana, upon what you had said earlier in terms of the type of information that we would hope to get or be able to get. Could you just expand a little further in the light of these specific comments?
Sure. So for completed studies, certainly pointing out to the SSEDs would be helpful, and then through MDIC, reaching out to the sponsor and asking them for more information is a way we could potentially go forward. But again, the concern is with the ongoing studies, it can only be provided in a limited form. And remember that we are not planning to provide any information specific to the sponsor into the document unless the sponsor has consented on that particular information. Otherwise, it would only be summary level information that will be consolidated through the survey responses and then incorporated into the framework document.
Great, thank you for that. And Greg, just from my own side, I sort of view this in terms of anything that is publicly posted, like the SSADs are posted, that's fair game, right? So that is in the public realm. You can certainly point us to public information. It's information that has not been made publicly available, especially for those ongoing studies, where I do think best practice would be to, maybe ask the sponsor if they could submit the information, or perhaps, call them up and say, hey, would you be okay with me providing this information to you? Hopefully this is at a level where it's not a problem, but it's, all these for studies that are ongoing for which there is not publicly available information, it is best to ask for permission before disclosing it. So thanks for that. Also like to point out, we had a couple comments. Brad's pointing out that there's a book coming out that's relevant, and a relevant paper by him, Frida Kuhner, Frida Kuhner and Forrest Williamson. The reference is there in the chat, so I'd encourage within the Q&A. So I encourage you, those of you that are interested, to have a look at. So he's got the text and the paper there, well, at least the paper. So please go ahead and have a look at that, and that could be something that would be a valuable reference going forwards. So, and then I see later on there's the book connected to bringing you the Bayesian Biostat 2020 conference. All right. We have an additional question that came up. For the FDA, what experience or expectation do you have in terms of communication between industry and FDA in terms of early study design stage using the RWE data? What level of support FDA statistician can provide? And Ram, I think this goes back a little bit to some of our earlier discussion about sort of what we've seen, how it came in. Could you talk just a little bit about how some of that process might work?
Yeah, thank you. And again, we are seeing early discussion with his sponsors and the FDA where there is a proposal that the sponsor wants to use real world data. And most of such discussions we have seen in our cardiovascular device arena in OHT2, but probably even in orthopedics, some submissions have come where they have used registry data. So we are seeing those kind of proposals, and we are engaged in early discussion with sponsors. And I think we are open to any meetings or any discussion where there is a need for such a discussion. But we really welcome the sponsors to reach out to FDA or to particular Office of Health Technologies 1 through 7. So that is certainly a good idea. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for that, Ram. And let me ask kind of like a sort of related follow-up question to that. So, you know, some of what we're talking about doing here is potentially in the space where you could use a novel method, so something that hasn't yet been published. You know, maybe you're working on that publication while you're setting the trial up point. That's certainly something that could happen here. Now, novel often equates to unknown, so you have a lack of previously published literature, and so it's kind of tough in terms of what you would provide to the reviewer as a sponsor. Can you give some comments, Ram, on sort of aspects of engaging with the FDA in the space where, you know, you want to be timely, you want to get through the review, but you are not only developing the study, but you might be simultaneously finalizing and publishing the methods related to support that study. What are some sort of key things to keep in mind in that aspect?
I mean, I have only experience with Medtronics going through MDIC and having a virtual patient model submission, and where the methodology was not fully developed. And when I came on board here in CDRH, we worked together and the paper was published. So that's one very good example where the FDA statisticians have collaborated with industry folks under the banner of MDIC. So we certainly can consider such an opportunity and work together. So yeah, door is not closed. Those are the good ideas for collaboration between industry and FDA.
And would you anticipate that, you know, because what we're talking about here is something that is, not yet widespread, right? It's something that we're trying to see more of. We're trying to promote the possibility for this different way of working. And if we are talking about different ways of using data sets, and data sets where there might need to be discussion on their quality, and using a method which, even while published, may not be out that frequently, would it be appropriate for, say, the sponsor statistician to reach out directly to a statistician FDA? Like any thought in terms of how the discussion should go? Because this is the sort of thing which is key to the progress of the study, but there's a limited audience that would really appreciate some of the details involved. So like what might be a mechanism for having the necessary conversations to advance that?
Yes, so our experience has been with Office of Health Technology too, that is in cardiovascular. And we are very lucky that we have Bram Zuckerman there as the office director, who understands statisticians probably better than some others. And he's always willing to entertain any such request. And certainly if he sees that methodology is novel, and he usually reaches out to statisticians and we work together. So he's a good example for such thing. And certainly we need to see more Brams around, and maybe some other offices kind of mimicking the same kind of approach. But we have some success stories here.
That's great to hear. And, related to that, you made the point about saying how MDIC had previously worked with the FDA, and Medtronic, around this mock submission, the virtual patient. I wonder, Jitesh, if you could comment just a little bit on the prior work. You mentioned it in your introduction to MDIC, in terms of what previously had been developed that might be useful as a reference to persons on this call if they aren't already familiar with it.
Okay, thanks, Ted. So when MDIC started its functioning in 2012, I think one of the very first project we undertook was on virtual patient modeling. So this was kind of a unique or innovative approach where modeling and simulation experts, that means engineering modeling and simulation experts, worked with the biostatistics experts to come up with data which can be augmented. I think the example we selected was ICD lead, and using modeling and simulation, I think we probably figured out the amount of data which we generate and augment it to the clinical trial, existing clinical trial information. And I think since it was a new methodology and a new mechanism, we wanted to test it out, and that's where we came up with the idea of mock submission. So we had FDA experts working on a submission as more like an industry submission in a group. And then we had FDA experts who are blinded from the other remaining FDA group who was developing it. So we have two sets of FDA experts, one acting as reviewers, blinded, and then other acting as sponsors along with the industry members working on this methodology. So the source codes and all the information relevant to that virtual patient model is available on MDIC website, and some of them are, I think, the codes are in the GitHub, but the links are available in MDIC website. And we have a lot of publication, including peer-reviewed manuscripts related to virtual patient modeling, if you would like to refer.
Great. Thanks for that, Jitesh. And for persons that aren't familiar with this, I really encourage you to have a look through some of those references. I think it is always helpful when we can perhaps expand our toolkit for things that might be available. And certainly I think modeling and simulation, particularly for medical devices, is a space that is not yet utilized to the extent that it should be able to. There's, certainly we benefit from some additional development, but there's already been a lot of great stuff done. And so certainly you benefit from familiarizing yourself with those materials that, as Jitesh has indicated, are available to be gotten through the MDIC.org website. Are there any other questions that folks want to put through from the Q&A? We have just a little bit of time here. If persons want to bring something else up, don't be shy. We're interested in hearing what's out there. Hopefully this is the type of information that's helpful for all of you. Certainly it's helpful for us. Vandana, perhaps I can ask you a question while we're waiting here to see if there might be an additional question coming up. I know you've already taken some nice steps in terms of summarizing some of the types of methods that you briefly described. We're working towards that white paper talking about different kinds of methods. Maybe you could give a comment in terms of, from your perspective, some of the ways in which we would hope to get input from persons on this call after the survey. After we get the data going forward, we're looking to expand that framework document. From your standpoint, what would be valuable to get for additional participation by the community?
Certainly. Not only through the survey, but also we are looking forward to have participation from industry statisticians or consultants who are experts in this field in terms of the methodology, helping us provide synopsis of statistical methodologies that can be included into the framework document, as that's one of the key things in developing this framework document, is to catalog all the methods and provide information on the statistical methodologies that can then be utilized further as a reference for leveraging external data. And as well as in terms of, any gaps that there may be in terms of statistical methodologies. Ted, you mentioned that there may be companies who are working on methodologies development simultaneously while the submission is being put together. So I think that would be very helpful to know, as that could be something that can be part of the framework document as to, is that methodology being developed to identify, filling in some of the gaps that exist currently, and how it can be then moved forward into regulatory submissions. So we definitely are looking forward to having participations from industry statisticians, and really hope that through the survey, as well as through your contributions in working group, as well as in terms of details on the methodology, we can together work on putting together this framework document. Thank you.
Great answer, Vandana. And I will point out that Jitesh has helpfully backed up the slides so you can see again the link to the SurveyMonkey that we're looking for people to have, which is also available when you registered for this webinar. And you can also see Jitesh's contact email to MDIC if you have questions you wish to put through to him. We did have one more question. I think we'll address this one and probably then wrap it up for the day since we'll be getting closer towards the end of our time. Jesse Berlin wrote in saying, my sense from working on a related paper and from experience on the drug side is that the issues that come up with FDA and others have much more to do with study design, e.g. can the entry and exclusion criteria for the primary study be reproduced faithfully in the external data, and is there a fatal flaw, such as a mortal time bias, or with the nature of the data capture, e.g. can we apply definitions of endpoints that capture the same events in the same way as was done in the primary study, and are patients being treated similarly with respect to ancillary care that might be received in the context of a clinical study. Will you be addressing these other kinds of issues? Right, so we're focusing right now on the survey of just saying what kind of stats issues are out there, how are people using the data. This is more of a process type question, which is certainly very important, and I think it would be tied in a bit more towards, for instance, making it clear for the FDA about processes they'd be looking for a good submission, and certainly sponsors and how to provide such a good submission. But Banu, do you want to comment maybe a bit more in terms of these types of issues, which are distinct from what the survey is, but certainly tie into the overall effort for the framework we've discussed?
Yeah, certainly data quality is definitely a main concern in terms of when utilizing data from external sources. And that does tie into, depending upon each particular clinical study submission, how the data quality from external data is appropriate or not in terms of the claim that the sponsor is planning to make with the current clinical study. So those aspects have to be looked into, but for the framework document, I think we can lay out some of the limitations, but may not be able to get into, the details of it. I think right now the focus is really on the statistical methods, but this does bring in important aspects that need to be considered when leveraging external data.
Yeah, I think like an interesting tie into that comes up like on the modeling simulation side. Like, so we've heard persons raise questions about, well, what type of model validation would you do for that? Do you validate using the code? Do you validate the code that generated the model? How does that work? I think there are some process questions that we're probably all trying to work through. Jesse's bringing up some really good ones with respect to simply, even before you start manipulating the information, like the base materials, are they appropriate to work with? And this goes back, quite frankly, to some work we've been doing recently with MDICnet and RAPID, right, where there's discussion around putting a lot of different trial data sources and observational data together and trying to come up with an overall estimate. And, to what extent is it appropriate to have that level of mixture? Maybe we need to think about that not all of that should be mixed together. Maybe it should be handled in some other way where you look at sets of information that are more similar to one another versus putting it all in one giant stew and getting an answer. That's certainly there. But we're just about a minute towards the end, getting ready to wrap up. Ram, do you want to say any final words before we close? And I'll ask Banu on that as well.
Add one more thing, Ted. Thank you. We have also seen use of external data sources from multiple sources, actually. From some we have seen from historical clinical data. We have also seen registry data, and Bayesian methods have come very handy when you have multiple data sources by putting weights on the likelihood function or the power prior approach. So the survey is talking about external evidence methods and data sources, but data sources not limited to just one data, but it could be multiple data sources. So please think about and try to give us some good case examples that we can put in this framework, and you can talk about the methods as much as you can, do. If the method is already or the data source is already identified in SSED, we have most of the information, but still you may provide some additional information about the methodology or some details that may not be in SSED. So we are looking for all information that you can provide to us to develop this document.
Great, thanks for that, Ram. We're just at time. Banu, any closing words from you?
just looking forward to participation from everyone and, you know, having it as a collaborative effort going forward. It's really important that we all come together in terms of providing information on the statistical methodologies and help develop the framework document. So if you have any, you know, comments on the methodology, on the survey itself, please reach out to Jitesh or myself or any of us, and it will be great to work together on this going forward. Thank you.
And please continue to share the survey information to other subject matter experts whom you might think might be relevant. So we have tried to, do a good outreach, but we might have missed, a lot. But so if you could help us with that, it would be really appreciated.
Yeah, definitely so. Last thing before we go, Estelle happened to point out, tying in that Jesse's questions are critical to accessibility on the drug side, and certainly, you know, just in general, the ability to handle missing data and judge comparability to control arm with respect to missing data will come up. So, you know, we see these are issues that underlie lots of our approaches and can be exacerbated in this space. But again, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you for your engagement. We're looking forward to having you provide information to the survey, and please, again, reach out with any questions about that. But thanks very much, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello.